People often imagine that reaching $100,000 requires a perfect career, a perfect plan, or some rare opportunity that only a few people ever receive. The common belief is that progress must be dramatic, noticeable, and immediate. Yet the truth is far more subtle, far more hidden, and far more powerful. The real breakthrough begins long before the milestone appears, in a place so quiet that almost no one pays attention to it. And the most surprising part is that this force has been shaping financial journeys for more than a century, working behind the scenes even when people do not realize it. There was a time when savings were recorded in small notebooks, when every coin and every bill was counted by hand. Income was limited, choices were fewer, and people learned to respect the value of even the smallest amount. During that period lived a man named Benjamin, who worked long days in a printing shop. His earnings were modest, and his expenses were always close behind them. Yet he noticed something that others ignored. Each month after covering necessities, he set aside a tiny amount that most people would have considered too small to matter. There was no drama in his method, no excitement in his routine, nothing that looked like the foundation of a future achievement. But the pattern he followed would become the basis of many financial principles taught decades later. Benjamin discovered that growth begins invisibly. It does not announce its arrival. It does not reward you immediately. It builds slowly, layer by layer, until one day it becomes strong enough to move on its own. His early years looked ordinary on the surface, but underneath, something important was happening. His habits were forming a framework that allowed progress to accelerate without forcing it. That quiet progress became the seed of a formula that would later help people reach financial stability much faster than they expected. As time passed, the world changed. Cities expanded, industries grew, and wages increased. People began earning more than previous generations, and with that rise came new choices, new pressures, and new distractions. Advertisers learned the psychology of influence. Businesses discovered how to capture attention. Spending became easier than ever, and saving became something people promised to start next month. Even though incomes were higher, many individuals drifted further from financial stability because the environment encouraged rapid consumption instead of long-term patience. In the middle of this shift, Benjamin's old notebooks revealed something unusual. The most meaningful progress did not come from sudden opportunity, but from consistency. The smallest steps had created an unexpected strength over time. People who studied his records later realized why most individuals never reach $100,000 quickly. They chase moments instead of systems. They trust motivation instead of discipline. They search for shortcuts instead of building foundations. Yet the individuals who rise steadily almost always rely on the same principle, a controlled process that interacts with time in the right way. The surroundings evolved again when technology entered the financial world. Digital platforms appeared, markets became accessible to everyone, and information flowed nonstop. People could invest instantly, track constantly, and react impulsively. The pace became faster, but the results did not improve. Many lost direction because speed without structure creates turbulence instead of growth. People wanted instant breakthroughs, but they struggled with the slow, invisible groundwork that makes breakthroughs possible. What kept working were the principles that had been discovered long before digital markets existed. The quiet discipline of controlled decisions, the steady rhythm of repeated actions, the ability to allow progress to develop naturally instead of forcing it. These ideas remained powerful because they were rooted in how growth behaves, not in the trends of any particular era. The surprising discovery is that reaching $100,000 faster does not rely on a big income, a secret investment, or a special advantage. It relies on arranging your choices so that time multiplies your efforts instead of erasing them. Once that structure is in place, progress begins to build quietly beneath the surface. It starts small. It remains unnoticed. But it grows with a persistence that surprises people when they finally see the results. This is where the real shift begins. Quiet actions gather momentum. Simple routines start compounding. And what once seemed slow suddenly transforms into a pace that feels almost unbelievable compared to the early stages. Many people think the breakthrough happens at the end, but the truth is that it begins much earlier, long before anyone realizes what is forming. The calm discipline that seemed insignificant becomes the force that accelerates everything that follows. As the early foundation begins to strengthen, most people still do not recognize what is forming. They see only small numbers and slow progress, and they assume nothing meaningful is happening. Yet beneath the surface, the structure starts interacting with time in a completely different way. What once felt like a simple effort begins to build pressure, like water rising behind a dam. Every controlled decision adds weight, every repeated action adds shape, and slowly, without announcing itself, a turning point begins to form. This turning point is rarely dramatic on the outside. There's no moment where the world suddenly changes or where a stranger appears with new opportunities. The shift happens internally, in the rhythm of decisions. It begins when a person realizes that their money is no longer moving alone. The habit itself begins to push. The routine becomes stronger than the motivation that created it. This quiet transformation is where the formula gains its power. In the years after Benjamin's notebooks were studied, Economists and financial educators tried to identify the exact moment when progress becomes easier. They discovered something unexpected. The moment does not depend on income. It does not depend on age. It does not depend on circumstance. It depends on reaching a point where the system a person built becomes more powerful than their impulses. Once that happens, the individual no longer fights against their own choices. The process begins to work almost automatically. People who experience this shift often describe it as a sudden sense of control. They begin noticing patterns they had ignored for years. Spending habits that once felt natural now appear unnecessary. Opportunities that seemed invisible begin revealing themselves. Instead of reacting to the world, they start anticipating it. What changed was not their environment, but their internal structure. The formula they created begins to guide them instead of the other way around. At the same time, the world around them continues changing in ways that challenge stability. New tools appear, new trends dominate conversations, and new financial distractions pull people in different directions. Many individuals drift from one idea to another, hoping to find a shortcut that will save them time. But those who remain anchored to their quiet structure begin to rise above the noise. They make fewer reactive decisions. They avoid the traps that drain progress, and their consistency begins to separate them from the crowd. The most interesting discovery is what happens to their growth rate. The early months or years that felt slow suddenly begin to accelerate. They are not working harder than before. They are working smarter because the system is shaping their outcomes. Their money begins to behave differently. It stops acting like a small amount and starts acting like something that can move with force. Historians who studied financial behavior across generations noticed how often this pattern appears. A person spends years struggling with slow progress, only to experience rapid growth in a relatively short period. The outside world sees the rapid growth and calls it luck, timing, or talent. But the real cause is the invisible structure built long before the momentum appeared. What looks sudden is almost never sudden. It is simply the moment when pressure becomes movement. This same pattern appears in businesses, markets, savings plans, and even personal development. Wherever consistency interacts with time, the early struggle eventually leads to a sudden shift. The turning point feels quick because the human mind notices only visible results. It does not notice the years of quiet preparation behind them. That hidden preparation is what allows a person to reach $100,000 faster than expected. At this stage of the journey, something else begins to happen. People start recognizing the value of every small choice. They notice how minor adjustments create major outcomes. They begin prioritizing decisions that strengthen their structure instead of weakening it. They reduce noise. They simplify routines. They create boundaries around their time and their spending. These actions appear small, but they create order. And when order increases, progress accelerates. This is the moment when the formula transforms from a slow-building foundation into a force that works independently. What once required effort now requires maintenance. What once felt impossible now feels predictable. A person who once struggled to save even small amounts begins to build at a pace that surprises even them. The most powerful part of this journey is that nothing magical occurred. No external miracle appeared. No major opportunity arrived. The acceleration came from the internal architecture they built through patience, discipline, and repetition. That architecture becomes the engine that drives the final stretch toward $100,000 and eventually beyond it. This is the quiet rise that almost no one sees. It is the hidden part of the formula, the part that often goes unnoticed because it looks too simple from the outside. Yet it is the reason some people progress far faster than others with the same income and the same circumstances. They are not waiting for the world to make things easier. They structured their lives so that progress becomes inevitable. As the structure grows stronger, the movement toward $100,000 enters its most revealing phase. This is where the pattern becomes clear enough to study, yet still quiet enough that most people miss it. The truth is that large financial milestones do not appear with fanfare. They emerge from long periods of silent discipline that compound until the results can no longer stay hidden. This is the moment when progress seems to accelerate on its own. Those who reach this point describe a shift in perspective long before the number is reached. They stop seeing money as a reward for effort and start seeing it as a tool that responds to the structure they have built. Their decisions become simpler. Their goals feel closer. And for the first time, they recognize that the formula guiding them is not an idea. It is a system that now has weight, direction, and momentum. This final stretch reveals another important truth. The closer a person gets to $100,000, the more they realize how much of the journey was determined by habits rather than income. They begin to understand how easily someone with a high salary can fall behind because they never built the internal system. And they understand how someone with a modest income can move faster because their structure is solid, consistent, and protected from unnecessary decisions. Economists who studied long-term wealth growth concluded that the biggest breakthroughs often occur when a person becomes extremely selective about their actions. They focus only on decisions that strengthen their structure. They avoid distractions, trends, and pressure to match the behavior of others. Instead of spreading themselves thin, they double down on the habits that brought them this far. This narrowing of focus creates clarity, and clarity becomes speed. At this stage, something remarkable happens. The gap between effort and result begins closing. In the early days, the effort felt heavier than the reward. Now the reward feels heavier than the effort. The structure multiplies the impact of every decision. Time, which once felt like an opponent, becomes an ally. And the person who once questioned whether progress was possible now begins to feel the certainty of their own momentum. To understand why the final climb happens faster, financial historians often point to a simple but powerful observation. Progress moves slowly when discipline is fragile. It moves quickly when discipline becomes stable. Once a person reaches stability, every choice compounds more cleanly. There is less friction. There are fewer setbacks. There is more confidence, more direction, and more consistency. Those elements create acceleration, not through luck, but through alignment. Many people on the outside misinterpret this acceleration. They see the final months of progress and assume the individual discovered a secret opportunity or stumbled into a rare moment of luck. They overlook the years of choices layered quietly underneath. Yet the truth is that the formula was working long before anyone noticed. It was simply waiting for the structure to reach a point where the results became visible. As the journey approaches its final destination, the person begins to understand something deeper than money. They realize they have changed on the inside. They have become steadier, more patient, more thoughtful about their future. What began as a financial goal slowly transformed into a shift in identity. They no longer see themselves as someone who is trying to reach $100,000. They see themselves as someone who builds systems rather than hopes for outcomes. This psychological transformation is the hidden engine behind every major financial milestone. It is why some people reach their goals and never look back, while others return to the same patterns after a few successful months. Without the internal shift, success becomes temporary. With it, success becomes a foundation for the rest of a person's life. When the number finally appears, whether through investing, saving, compounding, or disciplined income management, it does not feel like a miracle. It feels like confirmation. It feels like the natural outcome of a long, quiet journey that strengthened the person more than the bank account. This is why the formula continues to work even beyond the first 100,000. The structure is now stronger than any single milestone. The world around them still moves in cycles of distraction. People still search for shortcuts. They still jump from one idea to another. They still look for sudden opportunities that promise growth without structure. But the person who reached 100,000 the quiet way sees through these illusions. They understand that the power was never in the big steps. It was always in the small ones, repeated with intention. The most valuable lesson emerges after the milestone is reached. The formula was never about speed. It was about direction. Once direction becomes clear, speed arrives naturally. And once a person aligns their actions with a purpose they can sustain, progress becomes a continuation of who they are rather than something they chase. This journey leaves 3 insights that stay with a person long after the number is achieved. First, small actions become powerful when they are repeated with discipline, not when they appear dramatic. Second, structure always outperforms motivation because it remains steady even when emotions fluctuate. Third, the quiet years that nobody notices are the years that determine everything. The real warning is simple. If someone waits for the world to create the perfect environment, they will wait indefinitely. Markets will shift, circumstances will change, challenges will appear, but none of these determine whether progress happens. What determines progress is the system built long before results become visible. The final thought is a reminder that every great financial journey begins quietly. The world may not notice the early steps, but time will. And if the structure is strong enough, the day will come when the results rise to the surface and rewrite a person's future. If you want more stories that reveal the hidden patterns behind financial growth and long-term progress, continue exploring with the channel and join the people who build quietly before the world sees anything changing.